Hoot Howell had run the 8 Bell in Strangerville for nearly 30 years. His younger sister Annie worked as the bar's waitress. Well, that was her job on paper at least. Most of the time, she chatted up customers. The place was always packed. More people, more money, and more gossip. And Hoot loved gossip. He knew everyone's business. What made them paranoid? What made them tick? And what made them out of this world? Yep, just normal small-town America. They live here, across the street from the 8 Bell. It was usually just the two of them. But once in a while they took in those in need, such as Nervous Subject, a young man who wandered into town one day lost and confused. He told them of the bad place and his kind werewolf friend who helped him escape. He missed her, but didn't know what happened to her. Who tried his best to find who Nervous was talking about, but no one who fit the wolf's description turned up. He talked with his sister about Nervous and the werewolf, but she couldn't find anything either. The poor thing was probably dead or feral. Annie herself knew what it was like to almost lose herself to the beast within. She was lucky she had a brother who helped her through those dark times. And with the world's views changing on werewolves and occult sims in general, life as a beast and embracing who she was became easier. But try as Annie might to tame her fury, her brother was eventually on the receiving end in her teeth and claws. And days later, Hoot would feel the sting of the moon's curse. At first, he struggled with what had happened. He couldn't help but feel betrayed by Annie, even though it was an accident. Annie was apologetic and promised to help him find a cure. So she took him to Moonwood Mill to meet other werewolves, including Christopher Volkov, who, after having a long talk with, helped him come to terms with his lycanthropy. It didn't take long for Hoot to gain the trust and friendship of Collective's Alpha, becoming a friend of the pack. That was years ago, and although he hadn't visited Moonwood recently, he thought of that place and his friends often. Maybe it was time to get back in contact. The Collective might have answers on Nervous's friend, and maybe they'd know something about Lou, too. The boy wasn't his blood, but he was family all the same. Hoot worried about him. He hoped Lou was happy or at least safe. The Red Canyon Pack have lived in Strangerville for many generations. They live here in the Shady Acres area. This is Trevor Wolf. He's the patriarch and alpha of his pack. He might be rough around the edges, but when it comes to his family, he's fiercely protective and loyal. He and Rinnie have been together for 17 years and are still crazy for each other even after all this time. Taking care of a house full of werewolves keeps Rinnie very busy. In her downtime, she loves playing the piano and reading smutty werewolf books. Together, she and Trevor have 3 children. Marlene, the oldest and heiress to Trevor's pack. She's outgoing, confident, and as straight a student. She's the golden child, even when she's rampaging and causing a scene. Then we have her brother, Dustin. He's a dormant wolf like his mother, but you wouldn't know it because of his temper. But deep down, he's a good kid. He just needs to redirect his anger someplace else. Their newest addition to the family is baby Riker. He's his daddy's pride and joy. And ever since Trevor discovered Riker's greater wolf blood, he's considered making the infant his heir instead. He knows this could crush Marlene, but even she knew greater wolves made better alphas. The next member isn't their flesh and blood, but they treat him like one of their own anyway. Braden Jones was a military brat and troubled youth Trevor saw potential in. He's grateful to the wolves for taking him in when they didn't have to. But since he's discovered Marlene's his fated mate, he worries things around here will become complicated. They know they'll have to come clean about their relationship eventually, but for now, they'll enjoy each other in private. To some, Trevor and his pack were viewed in high regard. He was the greatest friend anyone could ask for. But to others, such as the mayor, Trevor was a nuisance. It probably didn't help that once a month the pack headed into town and caused trouble at the 8th bell. Of course, Hoot wasn't happy with Trevor whenever he caused problems at the bar, but Trevor always paid for the damages, plus a little extra. Hoot couldn't stay mad at his old friend anyway. He knew Trevor never meant any real harm. On this morning, the two men sat down for a talk. Instead of talking about the weird plants around town, Hoot mentioned he found his son after all this time. Turns out Lou was in Moonwood Mill, but Hoot wasn't sure about visiting him. He was worried Lou would turn him away. But Trevor encouraged him to go find Lou. Besides, Lou needed to know about the trouble he'd left behind. He needed to know they were still looking for him. Hoot agreed. He'd head out to Moonwood Mill first thing in the morning. All this talk about Lou's drama made Trevor grateful his own kids never gave him this much trouble.
This is Connie Ramirez. She lives here in Strangerville, in her childhood home, with her cat, White People Taco Night, who's actually a raccoon, but no one has the heart to tell her. Connie's traits are generous, good, and loner, with the additional caregiver and artist attributes. Connie was a rookie scientist at the lab in Strangerville, but after the explosion, she was transferred to the one in Oasis Springs. She had a personal lab under her house too. Built by her father long ago, it was the only place he attempted to bond with her. But as much as she liked being a scientist, art and literature were her true passions in life. To everyone in town, she seemed like a normal sim, but in truth, she was an alien and the product of an abduction. With her fear of the men in black and her father's trauma with aliens, she never stayed out of disguise for very long. Like all the other Strangerville scientists, Connie had to sign an NDA. There was also the threat from the men in black if she ever spoke about what happened that night. Always being a curious sim, Connie was determined to find out what really happened and what connection these weird plants had. They reminded her of the plants her father kept in their lab. She knew she couldn't do this alone and had to find help. And she'd find that help in the most unlikely person, someone who'd change the course of her life forever. If you were to ask Derick Pancakes what death felt like, he couldn't tell you. At least not the physical parts. All that time in a black abyss of death had left holes in his memory. But what he did remember was the humiliation and rage he felt, knowing he was defeated, knowing his body was shutting down. He felt no peace, like many said it would be like. He continued to silently curse the residents of Moonwood Mill until his very last moments. He couldn't remember the names of his packmates, their faces were a blur, but remembered the betrayal he felt after they abandoned him. He felt so strongly about this betrayal, he gave up his pack aspiration, becoming a lone wolf. He couldn't even tell you much about his own resurrection, just that he came to in a room with candles and a goddamn floating baby. Even someone like him was a little unsettled. That strange place had been built over an abandoned mall, but when looking into the place, he found nothing on it. Nothing to point to who or what revived him. But in truth, sometimes he wished he hadn't been brought back. All that money and power were gone, his house razed. On top of that, he didn't know if anyone was looking for him, so he moved from place to place. He never stayed in one area for long. After months of wandering, he finally settled in Strangerville, using what little savings he had to buy this house. It was a dump of a town, but it would do for now. The residents didn't make the town any better either. These were the kind of people he'd encounter at a gas station at 2 a.m. And it wasn't just the people who were weirdos. The plant life was concerning as well. He found a recent article about the lab explosion from a few years ago, and a decades-old article about the lab's construction. He wanted to ask around town about the plants, but decided against it. He was still laying low and didn't want to bring too much attention to himself. With funds running low again, Derick went back to his old job at Future Sims in Oasis Springs. With his credentials, he was a level 9 scientist again, with his own team to oversee. From day one, he made it clear he wasn't someone to cross. As he went around inspecting each area, he caught a strange scent, one that he'd smelled before, and yet, it was different somehow. Oh, what's this? An alien had infiltrated his lab. Had Derick found a new plaything? Derick approached the young scientist and introduced himself. He asked about her white lab coat and noted how odd it was she wasn't wearing blue like the others. Connie explained she was a scientist from StrangerVille, but after the accident she was sent here temporarily. How interesting. Derick was from StrangerVille too. He tried talking about the weird things going on in their town, but Connie didn't seem too eager to talk about it. Connie apologized, but she wasn't comfortable disclosing any information about StrangerVille. He asked when she planned on disclosing she was an alien. Yes, he knew her little secret. She was going to have to be more clever than that. Before he could say another word, she used her telepathy, seeing all the horrible things he'd done in his past. She now knew his little secrets too, and she could ruin him if she wanted. She denounced his evil ways and all of his atrocities. He snapped at her that if she ever pulled that shit again, he'd show her just how evil he could truly be. She laughed off his threat. She then removed her disguise and told him she'd personally see to it he'd give birth to triplets if he threatened her again. Hearing footsteps approaching, Connie changed back into her disguise. Elaine Robinson, head of Future Sims, entered the room and asked the bickering pair if everything was all right. She heard their arguing. Everything was fine, Derick told her. Just a little disagreement that's cleared up now. Good. She told him to wait for her in her office. There was something important she wanted to discuss. With Derick out of the room, Robinson told Connie she was a brilliant and beautiful young woman who was capable of great things in this field. But she had to stay away from Derick. Men like him would destroy her future. She saw the dreamy look in Connie's eyes. Robinson could acknowledge he was handsome, but he was also trouble. Robinson had nothing to worry about. Connie worked too hard to get where she was. No one was going to destroy that. She had everything under control. In Robinson's office, she got right to the point and told Derick she heard about the rumors surrounding him. She wanted to make it clear that she wouldn't tolerate that kind of behavior here. Whatever he did in his personal life was his business, good or bad, but he was to not bring that here. She then reminded him that relationships between lab leaders and underlings were frowned upon at Future Sims. All interactions between him and lower-ranking scientists were to remain professional. Now, did he have any questions? Yeah, just one. Was she done talking? He had a job to do and she was wasting his time. Before she could respond, Derick was out the door. He was lucky. They were desperate for a lab leader in tech. Otherwise, she would have fired him on the spot. Loki Beaker went on his weekly rant about budget cuts and the tech team. At this point, Connie was sick of hearing it. As much as it frustrated her too, she knew the constant complaining wasn't going to change anything. But she kept her mouth shut on the topic and let him complain. The last thing she needed was to be yelled at too. He reminded them their supplies with things such as crystals and elements were running low. So they were to use caution when making serums. And if something broke, they were to fix it themselves. Connie was far from a repairman, but she thought she did a decent job. A personal hit to Connie was loss of funding for her project. She was now denied access to ingredients needed to perfect her serum. Beaker sympathized with the young scientist, but stressed that if she was caught working on her project on future sim grounds, both of them could potentially lose their jobs. So she did her daily tasks without complaint, all the while wishing her workday was over, so she could go back to her personal lab. At least she got to work on the rocket, one of the few things she looked forward to at work. Another thing she looked forward to was gossiping with her coworker, Coriander Lothario, a junior inventor and mom of two. She told Coriander about her argument with Derick that morning, though she left out the part about her being an alien. She wasn't sure if her friend was ready to learn about that yet. Coriander heard rumors about that guy and warned Connie to stay off his bad side. She took her friend's advice and did her best to avoid him as much as possible that morning. But during her lunch break, Derick thought it was a good idea to join her. When Kyle excused himself, that's when Derick brought up Strangerville again. She thought she'd made it clear earlier. She didn't want to talk about it, but he kept going on and on, from the weird plants to the twitchy people. She told him again she couldn't talk about it. It would get her in trouble, and he could get in trouble too. He didn't mind getting into trouble. In fact, he loved it. That she didn't doubt at all. Connie was relieved to finally come home that evening, but she didn't go straight to the lab. Derick's constant questioning had her mind drifting back to the night of the accident. So many questions, and yet there were no answers. Maybe it was time she went back and answered those questions herself. Connie struggled to concentrate on her work at home. Her mind kept going back to Derick's questions about their town. But it wasn't just his questions that distracted her. It was the night of the accident too. She could still remember the panic and the ringing in her ears from the explosion. Former co-workers agreed with her that the truth needed to be told, but no one had the courage to blow the case wide open. If Connie were honest, she didn't have the courage either. But someone had to do it. Someone had to help this town before it was swallowed by whatever was plaguing them. Someone had to stop it before it spread. She met up with Hoot Howell and Trevor Wolf, two of Strangerville's most respected townies. She confided in them that she wanted answers too, and she hoped they could help her out. They agreed, of course, and were glad that someone from that place was ready to do something about this town. This wasn't going to be easy, of course, so they had to keep quiet and move in secret. She was relieved to have Hoot and Trevor on her side, but she knew she needed more help. If they were the muscle, then she'd need another brain to work beside her, another scientist with more experience. Derick was a perfect recruit. He was already curious about the lab and the plants, but every time she wanted to talk to him about it, she lost her nerve. Derick's memories had haunted her for weeks. She wasn't sure she could trust him, but she might not have a choice. Until then, she decided it was time to go back to the lab and do a little investigating. While Connie snuck inside, Hoot and Trevor waited in a truck hidden away. She looked around the lab, noting how gutted it was. It made her a little sad, because the place once had character to it. As she inspected the door, she thought back to when she was an intern here. She was forbidden to go into this area, and for that, wasn't given a keycard. She would have to find a way to get a hold of one. Maybe one of her old coworkers could help. While she was here, she poked around old files and hacked into the computers. She found a lot of interesting photos and test results of the strange plants. As she read over documents, her mind drifted to something else more interesting. Oh, great. Of all the people to have the hots for, it had to be him. She was so distracted by her dirty thoughts, she almost didn't hear heavy vehicles quickly approaching. Shit, it was time to go. She'd finish her snooping another night. Marlene was 17 when she saw the pink lines. In that moment, she thought her life was over. But almost a year later, she felt the opposite about the situation. Now she couldn't imagine her life without River in it. Of course, it wasn't easy. Babies never were. But all the hardships that came with it didn't faze her anymore. It was no longer a teen pregnancy that made her feel hopeless. No, this time it was being told she was no longer inheriting her father's pack. That great honor was going to her little brother, Riker. All because he was born with greater wolf blood and she wasn't. But to Marlene, this felt like her father's way of punishing her for getting pregnant. Trevor claimed this wasn't the case. The only way he was going to punish her was by spoiling her baby rotten. She didn't believe him, and when he dismissed her feelings, it was all the more evident that he secretly resented her. Marlene vented to her brother, who understood her feelings. Being a dormant wolf, and now the middle child, he knew all too well of how it felt to be pushed aside. Deep down, he didn't feel sorry for Marlene. She had been the golden child for too long, and seeing her humbled pleased him. She tried going to her mom. She was always understanding, but Rinny said there was nothing she could do about it either. She was a dormant wolf and therefore had to stay out of pack business. It wasn't fair. The only one who seemed to truly care about her feelings was Brayden, her fated mate, and River's father. He was her rock, and felt lucky to have him in her life. When she told him about her pregnancy, he was as devastated and scared as her. But a week later, he told her he'd thought it over, and believed they could do this. They were meant to be, and so was this baby. He then gave her a ring, promising to marry her as soon as they aged up. He told her often that he'd had nothing before River and Marlene came into his life. They gave him the motivation to do better. But as happy as Brayden and River made her, Marlene still struggled with losing her future position as alpha. It was all she'd ever known, and without that, what else was there for her? Maybe if she pushed her body and inner wolf beyond their limits, her father would reconsider. And if not, she'd become one of the most feared beasts known to werewolf kind. She wouldn't need a pack if that happened. She could protect her family better, especially from all the weirdness happening around town. And now she suspected there was going to be an extra family member to look after soon. How weird that she was getting a sibling younger than her own daughter. Connie spent her morning working up the nerve to talk to Derick. This normally wouldn't be an issue, but after having those naughty thoughts a few nights earlier, well, now she worried it would complicate things and cause a distraction if they worked together. As if thoughts about him weren't distracting her right now. But she had to get over it. Strangerville needed her. She found Derick in the biolabs and asked him why he cared so much about Strangerville. Why was he willing to risk so much for that town when he just moved there? He didn't give a damn about Strangerville, so it wasn't about caring, more like curiosity and the scientific pursuit. Those weird plants could prove to be useful, and he had a hunch they were connected to the tweakers walking around town. Alright, fair enough. She didn't expect this man to be a hero, and well, at least he was honest. She wanted to discuss this further, but it felt as though eyes and ears were everywhere. So, she proposed they meet up somewhere private after work. Derick suggested his place if she were comfortable with it. It was a bad idea, but she agreed. Connie arrived at Derick's an hour after her shift ended. She was nervous about this meeting. Once inside, she awkwardly complimented his house. Her social anxiety was going into overdrive, and her heart was pounding so hard and loud she wondered if he could hear it. Derick sensed her uneasiness and told her to relax. He didn't bite. Well, sometimes, but not this time. Connie felt a little better once they sat down and asked him what had he gathered about the floral life. The plants weren't mutated, but seemed to be extraterrestrial. However, they were nothing like the plant life on Sixum. When he'd kicked one, it released a cloud of spores into the air. Aside from an itchy nose, nothing had happened to him when accidentally breathing them in. Connie admitted she'd noticed the same thing. The spores were most likely immature and therefore less effective. Derick agreed. There had to be mature plants somewhere around town that were causing the citizens' odd behavior. During their conversation, Connie began to notice the way Derick looked at her. She felt butterflies with an extra sprinkle of social awkwardness. It was leaving her distracted again. Connie decided to end the meeting early. She asked him to meet her at the lab tomorrow night. Oh, he would be there. He looked forward to it. Connie arrived at the lab before Derick. She stood outside, waiting for what felt like forever. Had he forgotten? Or maybe he changed his mind about all of this. Either way, she wasn't waiting out in the cold a moment longer. She had to gather the rest of the evidence she needed for the dossier. Maybe then her old friends could help her out. She found herself at the sealed door again and thought back to her early days at this place. She'd wanted so badly to be a higher up and see what was behind that door. Now the thought scared her. Derick hadn't meant to be late, but he had his own personal errands to take care of. Oh, well, Connie would get over it, and… Wait, there was more than one person here. Not only that, but the stink of the undead was in the air. Oh, great, vampires. He should warn Connie. Connie heard footsteps quickly approaching. Before she could attempt to hide, she was caught. Barnes and Marks were two agents Connie had encountered during her time at this lab. They never saw her outside her disguise, and she hoped even in this form they couldn't recognize her. They forced her to sit in the nearby chair and began their questioning. But Connie refused to answer. She told them they were wrong for keeping what happened here a secret from the public. Agent Marks accused her of being a threat to national security, and because of that she was being taken into custody. And because she was an alien, she could kiss any rights she had before goodbye. Connie tried reaching for her ray gun, but Marks struck her before she had the chance. There were stars in her vision, and the world began to spin. Marks warned her if she tried that again, she'd receive something worse than a strike to the face. This couldn't be happening. She'd wake up and this would all be a bad dream, right? What was all of this now? Connie, did you invite guests without asking? Oh, the fun he was about to have. Oh, the fun he was about to have. Stay back, civilian. This doesn't concern you. Two armed men using their power to intimidate a defenseless woman. How pathetic. And 2 against 1 wasn't a fair fight. We warned you to stay back, you mongrel, Barnes said. Turn around now, and we'll let you live. He wasn't going anywhere, not when there was a walking corpse in front of him. He's a goddamn werewolf, Marks shouted. He ordered for Agent Barnes to put a stop to Derick by any means necessary. Agent Marks had been distracted by the fight and didn't notice Connie had taken out her freeze ray until it was too late. Between delivering blows, Derick shouted for Connie to run and hide. He had this plasma sucker. Agent Barnes didn't have time to process his defeat when Derick grabbed him and smashed his head into the ground. Derick went into the other room and admired Connie's handiwork. It was time to deal with this moron too. Agent Marks was about to thank Derick, but our favorite deranged werewolf had other plans. Oh, my God. Wait. Where did Derick get swords? You know what? I'll allow it. He had to give it to the man. He put up a decent fight for a puny sim. Everything had gone quiet. Connie didn't know if she should investigate or keep waiting. Her heart dropped when she heard claws clicking on the tile. Oh, thank God it was Derick. But at the same time, what the fuck, Derick? He was a werewolf this entire time? Last time he checked. Unless all this body hair was caused by something else. But why? How? She had so many questions. And he had answers. But first he had to know if she was okay. Actually, no, she wasn't. One of her worst fears almost happened tonight. She thanked him for showing up when he did. Otherwise, they would have taken her away. He pulled away from her and offered to take her home. They'd get her cleaned up and go from there. She was so tired, she didn't argue. She wanted to crawl into bed, but not before they had a talk. Connie was in disbelief. So, not only was Derick a werewolf, but he was immortal, a time traveler, and recently brought back from the dead. She didn't want to believe him, but something told her he wasn't lying. Besides, she was an alien birthed from a male sim. Most would find that pretty unbelievable too. They were two oddballs, she guessed. She asked him why he hadn't returned to his own time. Didn't he miss his home? He learned the hard way that time travel was a one-way street. It had been an urgent situation, but that was a story for another day. But what about immortality? She was under the impression werewolves grew old and died. Yes, most do grow old, but there were a special few that could achieve immortality. It took years and a lot of hard work, but he became what other werewolves could only dream of. Nothing could kill him. But he said he died. What happened? He wasn't 100% certain, but he suspected a silver dagger was involved. It was one of few weaknesses a werewolf had. She wanted to know more, but she could see he was tired, and her face was hurting again. He told her to take some time off if she wasn't feeling better by Monday. He'd make Lilith cover for her if needed be. She thanked him again for saving her, and told him to get some rest too. It was no problem. He was just being a gentleman. When Derick was gone, Connie took a rose petal soak to calm her nerves. It had been a long time since she'd allowed herself to have this type of self-care. She was out the moment her head hit the pillow. In her dreams, a wolf watched her from the edge of a forest. On the other side of town, Derick kept thinking about the events from the previous night. For the first time in probably ever, he did a kind deed by saving that girl. It left a strange, but nice tingling feeling in his chest. He hated it. Derick arrived at Connie's a few nights later, as she requested. Connie was almost giddy at the sight of him. She apologized for calling so late and on such short notice, but she wanted him to meet the rest of their team. The rest of their team? What did she have planned? She'd explain everything in her lab. Derick, meet Hoot Howl and Trevor Wolf. Connie wasn't sure if she was imagining it, but it seemed as though Derick tensed at the sight of them. Connie introduced Hoot and Trevor to Derick. She retold the story of Derick saving her from the Men in Black agents. She'd never seen anything like it. Hoot, said Derick, looked familiar. Had they met before? Derick laughed it off and said he got that a lot. But no, he was new here, so there was no chance they'd met before. Derick noticed Trevor keeping his distance. Good, he didn't want to deal with another nosy wolf. Connie sat everyone down and went over her plan. Her encounter with those agents were a reminder of how risky this was. If they were going to save this town, then she'd need their help now more than ever. Trevor, he was to be the muscle. She wanted him to make sure no one got too close to their investigation and to continue keeping the mayor in line. As for Hoot, she wanted him to be her eyes and ears, gather any info he could from townies. And as for Derick, she needed another brain for this operation. She read his files. He was a brilliant scientist, and there was no one else she wanted by her side in the lab. He was fine with that. Although he was no botanist, he'd do his best. Good. She wanted him to meet her at the library Friday after work, and Saturday morning, they could go to the lab and gather some more evidence. She thanked everyone again for coming and reminded them to keep their heads down for now. The two scientists went over their findings with the others. Hoot and Trevor tried hanging on to every word, but the science mumbo-jumbo went right over their heads. Especially Trevor. He wished his daughter was here right now. She knew this stuff better than him. Hoot pulled Connie aside after the meeting to share his concerns about Derick. There was something off about the guy. She needed to be careful around him. Derick's memories filled her mind and she had to suppress a shudder. She knew all too well what he was capable of, but she was choosing to trust him. She told Hoot there was nothing to worry about. Derick was a little on the eccentric side, but she promised he wasn't that bad. Besides, he'd saved her. That counted for something, didn't it? For her sake, he hoped he was wrong, truly. Derick was still in the lab, looking over a specimen. She asked him what was so fascinating about her father's flower. The thing was creepy, and she hated that it was in the lab with her. He asked if she noticed how similar her father's plant looked to the one sprouting around town. and it appeared to be a tentacle. This had to be connected to the plants. How did her father get this? In all honesty, she didn't know. Her father was always a bit of a mystery. He suggested she ask him about it. Maybe he could help solve this mystery. She really didn't want to contact him, but if it was for StrangerVille. Since his resurrection, something had felt off, though Derick couldn't quite figure out what it was. He thought he'd lost his immortality, but he didn't feel the effects of aging, and he still felt as strong as he was the night he died. He tried telling himself it was nothing, he was being weak, and to get over it. The old him wouldn't have tolerated this nonsense. Out of curiosity, he went to a doctor to see if he'd received any permanent damage. Perhaps that was it. But nothing was out of the ordinary with him, except one issue. It seemed he had low fertility. The odds of him having children of his own were slim to none. Both the diagnosis and his feelings towards the news caught him off guard. He was disappointed, though it would explain why an accident never occurred, despite the many lovers he'd taken over the years. He tried not to think too much about it. Sure, a werewolf's desire to breed like a rabbit was strong, but he tried to focus on other things. He threw himself into his work, both at Future Sims and StrangerVille, to keep his mind off of the diagnosis. And then there was the goal of completing his aspiration. Derick learned the hard way. Packs were a waste of time. They only held him back from his true greatness. Never again. He'd become the strongest werewolf, and he'd do it alone, no matter how long it took. Interacting with Ramirez was rarely a joyful experience, especially for Connie, who was reminded by her father at every visit that she was an inconvenience in his life. Why didn't she visit him more often? How spoiled and ungrateful she was. He told her they could visit outside. He didn't want her touching his stuff. Fine, whatever. She'd get right to the point then, and tell him what was going on in StrangerVille. Then she brought up the tentacle in the lab. He didn't know what she was talking about. There was no tentacle in the lab. Maybe if she was a better scientist, she'd know what was actually in there. The giant weird flower in the glass pod, it looked similar to the plants growing around town. He seemed to be thinking it over for a moment before telling her that the flower meant nothing. He didn't even remember where it came from. She need not worry her empty head over such a thing. Empty-headed? He then accused her of spying. That was the real reason why she was here, wasn't it? She was always snooping in his business. But Connie refused to tolerate this kind of disrespect. She was exhausted from work, and he was draining her more. She was going home. Fine, he wanted her gone. She could come back when she was done being an ungrateful brat. When Connie got home, she had a bubble bath and threw all her emotions into a painting. Maybe she couldn't fistfight her dad, but at least she had this. The next morning, she met up with Derick at the lab. She much preferred doing this during the day instead, and just seeing him made her feel better. I see Derick's artwork is still here. The pair went to work on gathering more evidence. Apparently, what Connie had gathered wasn't enough for her hacker buddies. They needed more if she wanted that keycard. Derick, that's not. You know what? Never mind. Keep up the good work. Derick found her on a computer and asked if she knew what she was doing. One wrong move and this whole operation could blow up in their face. But Connie assured him she knew what she was doing. She had been doing this since she was a kid. It was how she got extra money for school clothes and snacks. He thought it was interesting she had this skill. She didn't seem like the type to do this. He admitted he never learned the skill himself. In the past, it was always his henchmen who did this work for him. Oops, well, at least she got the info before it fried. Connie, it's not that serious. See, Derick is fixing it. All she needed was one more piece of evidence and she could finish her dossier. And there it was. She finally had what she needed. Once they got back to Connie's, She immediately sent off the dossier. Now all they had to do was wait. As the day was winding down, Connie thanked Derick for helping her out today. It was no problem. He couldn't wait to see what was behind that door. Whatever it was, he was sure it would prove useful. He could have whatever was down there, as long as they stopped this threat. She just wanted things to go back to normal. Before he left, he brought up her hacking skills. Since he never learned, he could really use her help with something. Sure, whatever it was, she was willing to help. There was a computer in his old lab back in Moonwood Mill. Last time he was there, he realized someone had locked it down. No matter how hard he tried, he couldn't gain access to his research. Perhaps she could have a go at it? Sure, she was willing to help. She always wanted to see Moonwood Mill anyway. Good, they'd make the trip next week. He told her to stay close to him. Moonwood Mill wasn't very safe at night. Here they were, Moonwood Mill, the place he'd spent most of his werewolf life, and where he died. This place was beautiful, but freezing. How could he live here for years? Give her the hot, arid desert any day. It was much nicer in the summer. Maybe someday he'd bring her back. Where this house now stood was where he'd died. Back then, it was thick with pines. He wondered if his body was buried under the house. After such a morbid thought, they raced across the bridge. Poor Connie struggled to keep up with Derick. She was already out of breath. There was howling all around them, which scared Connie. Derick reassured her that everything was fine. Even during full moons, werewolves preferred the solitude of the deep forests. She believed him, but she was still on edge. Never fear, he was here to protect her. They passed a few houses that left Derick agitated. Connie wanted to ask what was wrong, but decided against it. Whatever the matter, it was probably connected to his dark past. He told her they had to keep going. They were close. Nestled in the bushes was the entrance to the mines that would take the pair to his old lab. Inside the tunnels, Connie became unsettled. Why on earth did the werewolves like exploring this place? Derick sensed her unease and changed into his wolf form. In this form, he promised to keep her safe and warm. Nothing bad will happen to her as long as he was around. They were almost there. He could smell it. They were so close. Soon he'd have his old research back. At long last, he was back in his old lab. Taking a look around, he'd forgotten just how bad off it was. She told Derick she loved what he did with the place. It was very chic, very modern. He couldn't take all the credit. He owed a lot to the designers he hired. All right, enough yapping. Was she going to crack that computer or not? Yes, Your Fuzzy Highness. I'll get right to it. Whoever locked Derick out of this computer really meant business. This might take a while. As long as he got it back, that was all that mattered. He thanked her again for doing this and promised to take her somewhere special. She told him he didn't have to do that. She loved helping people and was happy to do this. It took longer than she thought, but eventually, she was able to gain access to his computer. She pointed out that it was laggy from age and neglect, so he might want to be careful. He didn't care about that. He was finally getting his research back after all these years. That's weird. He wasn't finding anything. Where did it all go? No, this couldn't be. Everything was gone. Someone had deleted all of it. Years worth of hard work. Connie tried to be optimistic, but Derick didn't want to hear it. It was gone, all of it. She didn't understand. Years worth of research, time and energy was gone. She would never understand the sacrifices he made in the name of science. But Connie wasn't taking that kind of disrespect. Maybe if he backed everything up better, this wouldn't have happened. Derick demanded she get out of his lab. He didn't want to look at her anymore, but it was dangerous out there, and she heard howling. He shouted again for her to get out, as his fury consumed him. All the lights in the sewers were out now, making it impossible to see. She couldn't remember the way out, and all around her were strange noises. This was the last time she'd go anywhere with a werewolf. Wait, what was that? Oh, great, a rabid werewolf. He chased her all the way to the lab entrance, where he attacked her. Derick's rampage was over and he went to investigate the noise. He saw a rabid wolf standing over an unconscious Connie and realized what had happened. Derick picked up Connie and told her he was sorry about this. He'd get her back to the lab and everything would be okay. He promised. Connie wasn't sure how long she was out for, but her head was pounding and her sides hurt. She found Derick working on the radio. He was calm, as if he hadn't just rampaged hours earlier. Still feeling the sting of their fight, Connie fought back the need to cry. She didn't understand why he'd been so mad at her. It wasn't her fault the computer was wiped. He wasn't mad at her, and it wasn't her fault. It was the situation combined with the full moon. He had moon immunity, but he still felt its sting. Was it going to be like this every time? Most of the time he had a handle on his beastly nature, but on rare occasions, his inner wolf got the better of him. He would behave next time. He promised. He promised. He told her to get dressed. He promised he'd take her somewhere special. But they had to move while the moon was still out. There it was, the moonflower. Derick explained that it was one of a kind and this was the only place it grew. It bloomed only during a full moon, no matter the season. It was beautiful. She was glad he showed it to her. And he was glad she loved it. He wanted her to have it, a rare and beautiful flower for someone equally rare and beautiful. Connie thanked him for the flower, but she wasn't anything special. She was. Connie's world was spinning as she and Derick kissed. It was a moment she only entertained in her dreams. He stepped away to apologize for being so bold, but Connie pulled him back in. They should probably head back home. She looked cold. Back at Strangerville, Derick told Connie goodnight. It was late and she looked tired. But she didn't want him to go. She wanted him to stay. He didn't think she was certain of what she was asking of him. But she was certain. Didn't he want this too? Did he want this? His inner wolf was running in circles. And so he stayed, sharing this moment with her. A moment that would be an awakening for Connie. Connie was disappointed to find Derick gone the next morning. Though, she knew she shouldn't have been surprised. She knew there was a chance that letting him into her bed could have ruined their partnership. And she feared that's what had happened. She spent the 2 days of her vacation time staying occupied and hoping she'd keep Derick off her mind, but it wasn't easy. She hadn't heard from him either. No calls, no texts, and she was too afraid to contact him herself. She vented her frustration and fears to her invention robot. The poor thing didn't understand what she was talking about, but hey, it was cheaper than therapy. On New Year's, Derick came knocking. She tried to hide how excited she was. Inside, Derick apologized for ignoring her for the last few days. He admitted he thought their night together would get her off his mind, but it proved to be the opposite. Girl, you fold too easily, but honestly, same. He'd meant what he told her that night. She truly was a rare beauty. Connie was honest with him and admitted how worried she was for the last 2 days. She thought she'd ruined everything and made things awkward between them. Ruined? This was an improvement in his eyes. She invited him to spend New Year's Eve with her. It was bad luck to spend it alone, or so they claimed. He accepted her invitation. He wanted to bring in the new year with someone special. Of course, Derick was probably lying to her about how he felt, but it was nice to hear those words anyway. Connie celebrated the new year with a kiss that Derick gladly accepted. Derick suggested other activities to help bring in the new year. Of course, Connie was more than happy to do these other activities. Well, I guess we'll leave her to live out every book talk girlie's fantasy. The next morning, Connie woke up to hammering on metal. She went outside to find Derick working on her rocket. Before she could ask what he was doing, he explained that while inspecting her rocket, he'd noticed it needed some adjustments. Nothing major, but she probably wouldn't have ended up where she wanted if she piloted it. He asked her if she was planning on going back to Sixum. Was that what the rocket was for? Connie was the product of an alien abduction, so she'd never seen Sixum before. She hoped to find her alien parent and get some answers. Whoever her father's pollination technician was, owed her an apology. Derick, this woman was about to give her said backstory. Go take a cold shower. Later that evening, Connie sat him down for a talk. Since they were, well, doing it now, did that mean they were together? Derick asked her if this was what she wanted. All of this was up to her. It was, but did he want it too? Of course, but she had to consider that he was immortal and much older than her. Plus, he's a werewolf and sometimes his beastly nature could be a bit much, even for himself at times. But none of this bothered Connie. She could handle him and his wolfy ways. And as for being older than her, that didn't bother her either. A good and selfless man would have done the right thing and turned her away, but he was neither of those things. Connie told him she was glad for that. While they waited for the keycard, Connie and Derick spent their free time together. They provided each other the distraction and stress relief during this time. They tried to remain professional at work in the hopes of no one catching onto their relationship. But it proved to be much more difficult than they thought. The unlikely pair constantly craved each other in a way neither imagined. They were opposite in almost every way, and yet they came together so easily. Maybe that's what it was, Connie thought. A magnetic pull that was too strong for them to resist. Not that Connie wanted to resist. For the first time in her life, Connie felt wanted and desired. For the first time, someone told her sweet things and made her feel beautiful. And maybe, Derick didn't mean the things he said. Maybe this was a game to him. But for now, she'd enjoy these moments with him. After their quick cardio sessions, they went back to their respectable posts, acting as though nothing were out of the ordinary. But neither could fully concentrate on their work, both waiting for the day to end so they didn't have to sneak around. On days when Connie was held up in her personal lab, Derick took the opportunity to work on his lone wolf aspiration. He didn't particularly like Trevor Wolf, but he seemed more trustworthy than Old Man Howell. And who knows, maybe when the time was right, he could use the Red Canyon pack to his advantage. Trevor had his own skeletons in the closet. He would be less likely to judge Derick for his own. He'd come over more often if the daughter wasn't always watching him. What a little weirdo, he thought. A few days later, Connie showed up at Derick's and told him the keycard finally came in the mail. Well, he hoped her hacker friends had the right card, or he'd have to hunt them down and hurt them. She hoped he was kidding, but she had a feeling he wasn't. They decided to head to the lab first thing in the morning. Until then, they'd celebrate their small victory. Derick took out a bottle of nectar he found during his time on the run. Connie never had nectar before, but she liked it. It was sweet and made her feel warm and tingly. She liked it so much, she drank her glasses a little too fast. Before she knew it, she was on her third and started feeling giddy. Derick suggested she slow down or else she'd pass out. Connie ignored his warning. She wasn't worried. She had everything under control. Yep, she was in complete control. With more nectar in her system, she felt more flirty and playful. She was bolder with Derick, telling him all the things she wanted to do to him, and said she'd make him pregnant. He warned her again that she needed to slow down. Connie insisted she was fine. She just felt a little heavy, that's all. Well, he couldn't say he didn't warn her. She wasn't waking up anytime soon, so he carried her to his bed and let her rest there. In the meantime, he'd continue working on his next servo bot. Hours went by, and Connie was still passed out. Derick stepped outside for a bit to feel the cool spring air on his fur. All those months on the run had forced him to suppress his beast, but now he felt comfortable again to spend more time in this form. He wandered to the edge of town and watched the military base. Beyond that was the lab with its secrets. Soon, he'd learn those secrets and use them to his advantage. Across the street, he noticed someone watching him. What did this guy want? Oh, great, here he comes. The stranger said his truck broke down about a few miles down the road. On top of that, his phone was dead too. This town creeped him out, and he swore those weird plants were chirping at him. The stranger's ranting was drowned out by the voices of his friends. They started as whispers, but grew louder. This man is lying to you. He wants to hurt Connie. You can't allow that, Derick. They were right. He couldn't let this happen. The stranger noticed the shift in Derick and tried lightening the mood. It wasn't working. He told the stranger to be quiet. He wasn't going to let anyone hurt Connie. Waffles, Connie said. You're betraying your ancestors. He was the first to admit he was an absolute disgrace. To make it worse, sometimes he ate French toast too. Connie told him that was diabolical. Yes, well, that's me, the family disappointment. She couldn't believe that. He was far from perfect, but a disappointment? She didn't know his family, and he hoped she never did. Anyway, he didn't want to talk about it, or think about it, for that matter. What he did want to think about was what was behind that door. He told her to hurry up and eat. The sooner they arrived at the lab, the better. This was it, the moment of truth. Derick reminded her that any tech they find down there was his for the taking. She called him greedy as she scanned the keycard. So much for that, Derick said. We'll need hazmat suits if we want to travel further into the lab. They made their way down a hall that wasn't blocked by a spore cloud and came across an underwhelming lab. Inside were chemistry stations used to create vaccines. Derick questioned how Connie could have worked here and yet hadn't known about this. She hadn't worked here for very long when the accident happened. No one would have trusted an underling with a secret like this. He told her they should probably get out of here. With the door open, the MIB might show up again. On their way out, they noticed the plants had doubled in size. Connie grabbed a few samples and pictures before they got out of there. The plants hadn't just bloomed at the lab, they were all over town too. Not only had they bloomed, but there were more of them. As Connie and Derick observed the storm cloud from the edge of town, they questioned if they were in over their heads. Derick admitted they probably were, but they could do this. First thing was to get a hold of some hazmat suits and go from there. Her father probably had an old suit somewhere in the lab, and for Derick's, there was a shop down the road that carried one. Derick wasn't sure about buying an old suit from the local weirdos, but if Connie trusted them. Actually, no, he still didn't trust them. Connie made the purchase, but the shop owner explained that without a spore filter, the suit was useless. They had their suit, but now they needed a filter. Lucky for Derick, she knew how to make one. She just needed a spore scanner. And where were they going to get a scanner from? She knew where, she just didn't know how. Soldiers crowded Hoot's place almost nightly. The pair questioned which soldier to get a scanner from. Derick suggested they find the one who looked the most pathetic. Like that guy, he looks like a loser. Connie chatted up the soldier. She asked him questions about StrangerVille and what the military was like. She then complimented his body and uniform. He seemed to really like her flattery until she mentioned the scanner, and that's when she fumbled. He snapped and said a citizen like her had no business asking those questions. Derick jumped in and said there was no reason to speak to the lady like that. She was only curious. The soldier replied that curiosity killed the cat. Derick didn't like the soldier's tone and asked him to step outside for a moment. Did someone order a spore scanner? She was amazed. How did he get this so easily? It didn't take much convincing, Derick told her. After all, he could be very persuasive. A few days later, after Derick created his own scanner, they were back at the lab, gathering spores. He once again questioned her ability to repair the hazmat suit. He didn't want to turn into one of those freaks in town. Connie thought he was a big brave wolf, not a scared little chihuahua. Just get it done right, or else. Connie had spent all day working on the spore filter for Derick. It was complete, but she'd need more time to properly assemble the hazmat suit. She wanted to make sure he was safe. Derick questioned why she didn't just let him take her hazmat. He was immortal. Whatever was down there, he could handle. Connie reminded him they were in this together. They both were going down there to figure out what was going on. He thought she was crazy, but if this was what she wanted, then fine. He didn't understand. This was her town, her friends, and as a former scientist here, she felt it was her duty to stop this madness. The average sim would have found her motives admirable, but Derick thought she was foolish. But he didn't dare say this out loud. She was too sensitive for that. Instead, he told her to put on something nice. They were going out. Strangerville could wait a little longer. Connie's family was from Ciudad Enamorada, but she herself never had the chance to visit. It was more beautiful than she could have ever imagined. She was glad Derick brought her here. When they sat at the bar, Derick teased her about her lack of ability to hold her nectar. He wanted to show her a good time. He couldn't do that if she passes out. That night was an accident. She was never getting smashed again. Connie spoke of her family here. She'd never met them, but her father mentioned them often. She wasn't sure they knew of her existence. He asked if it was family drama. She admitted she wasn't sure. Actually, most people didn't know of her existence growing up. He didn't understand how that was possible, but she brushed it off and said her father simply didn't talk about her much. Something wasn't right about that, but Derick didn't say it out loud. He didn't want to upset her, and instead told her he was glad he knew of her existence. After having drinks, the pair wandered around the park. As they took in the beauty of the area, Connie somehow managed to get Derick to open up. He talked about growing up in Willow Creek and being the youngest to Irish triplets. He told her about becoming a werewolf, how his first transformation had been a painful and frightening experience, but worth it. She wanted to push for more details on his past, but she had a feeling it would only push him away. So, she chose to stay in the moment instead, and enjoy herself while ignoring that she was falling for him as the night went on. For Derick, he wasn't sure what he was feeling, but there was something there that was hard to ignore. Connie was his, and only his, and he'd make sure she never had to worry about anything. She would always feel sheltered and protected. It was foolish to form an attachment like this to someone who could never share an eternal life with him. But he supposed he'd cross that bridge if they got there. Maybe someday he'd find a way. They couldn't believe they stayed out all night and most of the morning. It was a good thing they didn't have work later. Connie suggested they go back to Strangerville. They needed to rest, and then go from there. Raphael hadn't heard from Connie in weeks. He was becoming worried for the girl. Good thing he still carried a spare key. Well, at least the house was spotless. He heard Connie giggling in the kitchen and made his way in that direction. Raphael couldn't believe what he was seeing. His own daughter doing deplorable behavior in the kitchen. For God's sake, she took her first steps in here. Derick demanded to know why the old geezer was in Connie's house. It's okay, Derick. This man is my father. Wait, Derick Pancakes, the crazed scientist? Shouldn't he be pushing his elder years? Doctors hate me. He thought this was a joke. He knew Derick was vile, but to lay with Raphael's innocent daughter, he felt sick. Connie, he's old enough to be your father. Oh, is that why she likes to call me daddy? This was a serious situation. He demanded Connie end whatever this was immediately. Derick was the reason Raphael never progressed in the science field. Derick's memories of Raphael came flooding back. He told the old man he barely progressed because he was slow to embrace scientific progress. Really, Dad? You said it was my fault your career was ruined. It was Derick who contacted the aliens that night. It was his fault Raphael had been stuck with a difficult child. Connie wasn't hearing it. She wasn't difficult. She was a child with special needs that he chose to ignore. Raphael told her to watch her tone. He could easily turn her over to the MIB. He told her one more time to obey her father and end this relationship. Derick had enough of Raphael's nonsense and told him to leave Connie's house. He was nothing but a bitter old man. But Raphael wasn't fazed by Derick. So Derick made things louder and clearer for the old geezer to understand. Fine, Raphael was gone, but before leaving, he told Connie to not come crying to him when this man hurts her. She made her bed, now the brat could lie in it. And yet, he feared for his child's safety. Like the two nerds that they were, the couple spent the rest of the evening playing chess. Connie thanked Derick for running her father off. It frustrated her that even after all this time, that man had the power to upset her. He told her he was impressed she stood up for herself. It wasn't easy dealing with difficult parents. She asked him if his own parents were difficult. Was that why he didn't like talking about them? In a way, yes. Especially his mother. But the reason why he didn't mention them was for the mystery. They say being mysterious made someone more attractive. So is it working? I think that's a yes. Are you serious? Connie's out of your league. The next day, Derick met up with Connie at their little rendezvous at work. He was shocked to see her out of her disguise and questioned her safety. But Connie wasn't worried. She decided she wasn't going to live her life in fear. Being an alien was nothing to be ashamed of. While he was happy she was living her true self, he still worried for her. It helped that she had a big, strong werewolf looking out for her. And as a thank you for looking out for her, she had a gift for him. One modified hazmat suit ready for action. It looked like this called for a celebration, and Derick could only think of one thing. This was it. Tonight, they'd finally know what was beyond the cloud of spores. On the outside, Connie appeared confident in herself, but inside, she was terrified. At least the suits were holding up. So far, neither felt the urge to twitch and run around with their heads thrown back. They reached a point that wasn't thick with spores, but they didn't feel comfortable enough to remove their suits. They came to a door covered in strange vines. This had to be it. And there it was, the source of the town's misery. Against their better judgment, the pair approached the mother plant. Connie, being the good and generous sim that she was, thought she could reason with the mother plant. Derick thought she was crazier than he was, but let her try anyway. That went really well, Derick said. I think you two are besties now. Oh, very funny, Derick. We need help destroying this thing, but we can't do that until we can make a vaccine. According to those documents they'd found, a vaccine could be made with strange fruit and spores. But they needed to move quickly. With extra spores and strange fruit on hand, Connie quickly went to work on the vaccines. Derick stood on guard as she worked, in case any unannounced visitors stopped by. As he watched her, Derick began to think about how this vaccine could benefit him. Something like this could be of value if he patented it, perhaps if the virus spread. No, Connie would catch on to his plan. But still, all that money and power, it was tempting. Everything outside was worse than before. Even from Connie's place, the storm was intimidating. The number of plants and tweakers had increased around the neighborhood. They had to act fast. If they come knocking on my door, I'm blaming all of this on you, Derick told her. The next day, they went back into town to find test subjects for the vaccines. It didn't take long for Connie to spot Meredith Roswell. She waited for a reaction, but sadly it didn't seem to work for Meredith. Connie was upset, but Derick reminded her that science would not have progressed if scientists gave up after one failed experiment. They had 2 more vaccines left. They had to keep going. He was right. Strangerville depended on them. She thanked him for the encouragement before they continued their search. She found another one of Mother's victims. This time it was Trevor's brother, Travis. She got a reaction, but it wasn't quite what she had hoped for. Her last vaccine was used on Ted Roswell. She silently pleaded for this one to work. It looked like she got the right reaction. This was it. She could make more and begin recruiting for the fight. Derick expressed his excitement and praised Connie for her hard work and bravery. She thanked him for helping her along the way. She knew he didn't like doing the right thing, but she still appreciated him. True, he still didn't care about this dump of a town or the townies, but he knew this meant a lot to her. And well, she meant a lot to him. Connie's heart fluttered at his words. He told her not to let it go to her head. Yes, the big mean wolf has feelings too. Now let's go back to the lab and finish this vaccine. Connie spent most of the night working on several vaccines, 3 for recruits, and the rest would be used on Mother. Look how hard at work Derick is keeping Connie safe.
Aw, you look so cute sitting there doing absolutely fucking nothing, bitch! Get your ass up! Get your ass up!
It had been a long night, and the 2 were exhausted. Neither could sleep, however, and stayed awake, talking about what would come the next day. They agreed they wanted Trevor and Hoot's help, but one thing Derick didn't agree on was Connie taking the lead. Being immortal, Derick was nearly indestructible. He should be the one to lead this. Connie wasn't immortal. He didn't like the idea of her facing the mother plant head-on. She could get hurt but she told him she would be fine. She could do this, and he was going to be by her side. She started this and she'd see it through till the end. He still didn't agree with her choice, but he promised he wouldn't be far during the fight. She wanted to tell him she loved him, but the words were stuck in her throat. For now, she'd show him. They would provide each other a distraction from what was happening outside. It was time to gather their team. They went to the wolf's residence first and tried recruiting Trevor, but Trevor declined. He was sorry, but his oldest boy was missing and his newborn was sick. There was too much going on here to worry about that lab. Connie understood and hoped he found his son soon. He wished her luck on fixing this mess. Marlene had overheard their conversation and offered to help. She told Connie and Derick she recently reached apex status and was more than capable of helping them with the mother plant. Connie agreed. She believed in Marlene. You mean we're trading an alpha for MTV 16 and pregnant? Well, okay. I guess she'll make a good meat shield. Wow, okay. Well, that's rude. Connie apologized for Derick's behavior and said she'd love to have Marlene. They had to get moving if they wanted to get to Hoot's place in time. The first sim to be vaccinated was Derick. He didn't seem to like that very much. Next up was Hoot. And then Marlene. At the lab, Connie reminded everyone that this wasn't going to be easy. The mother plant was tough, but as long as they looked out for each other, they would be fine. This was it. They would deal with the mother plant and rid Strangerville of this plague. As she looked up at the mother plant, Connie began to question her life choices. Connie ran to Derick and asked if he was okay. She saw he got into a fight. Of course, he was fine. Those puny Sims were a cakewalk. But was she okay? She was the one taking swipes from the mother plant. She was a little sore, but she never felt more alive. Strangerville was safe, and they had done it together. Derick told her she did most of the work. He was just a tag-along. He was more than a tag-along to her. He meant everything to her. She loved him. He admitted he'd fallen for her too. It was an annoying emotion, but it was a nice feeling nonetheless, and he was glad it was her. Days later, Connie and Derick stood in her backyard and watched the sunset. Connie confessed that she recently put in her 2 weeks' notice at the lab. Derick supported her choice, but was surprised. Didn't she love being a scientist? She liked being a scientist, but in truth had settled on that career to make someone else happy. Fighting the mother plant had taught her that life was too short to follow someone else's dream. Art was her true passion, and she was going to follow that. If that's what she wanted, then he could get behind that. But now she had to ask, what did he want? Was he leaving Strangerville now? He didn't plan on leaving anytime soon. There were some good things about Strangerville, and he was looking at one of them. The next morning, Derick stepped outside and looked over the town he'd called home for nearly a year. This place may not have been his first choice, but he could see the potential. He'd lost Moonwood Mill, but Strangerville was his for the taking.
message. New nuts.
Bibahana was afraid.
Oh, Kirasha.